Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you so much for tuning in and sharing in this now moment with myself and with one another. I'm just waking up, having some coffee, and I thought I'd pop online and just share a few things in this particular video. So, welcome. If you haven't seen these videos before, and welcome back if you have. My intention is unity and oneness in the highest levels of love light. I'm just kind of going to, my intention with this video is to share some updates or downloads and interpretations of those downloads of what I've been understanding and hearing about the human body and some changes that are going on chemically within the brain, physically within the body, and playing with this in a synchronistic way that of how I've received this information and these downloads. I'm gonna get a cup of coffee, just waking up. So let's have some fun with this. I have a tendency to get a lot of my downloads and information in word format, so to speak. These words come through. Some people call this automatic writing, some people channel. I utilize, and I talked about this in my previous videos, so I invite you to go back and watch the last video I did with the little energy of the now, because I go into quite a bit of depth from my perspective about some of my experiences and what it looks like for me. But in case you don't want to watch that video or you haven't seen it, this is going to talk a little bit about how I've been receiving my downloads and what they look like. But in addition to that, sharing some of my own interpretation. The way that we interpret the downloads that we receive is based on our own filtration system. It is based on our own personal, so we all are, from what I see, we have a blueprint, a divine blueprint, divine design, whatever we want to label it as. But this blueprint is at this juncture in our reality movable, livable. It's not like this rigid um, existence in which we have to fit within a box or a category. And I talked a lot about categorization in my previous video. And essentially, what I've been guided to do is share how I express in my own way. Because when we receive downloads, and how is it that we receive downloads? We receive them from the sun. What does that? We receive them from the earth. We can receive them from our oversoul, our higher self, other helpers, our guides, angels, galactics. But ultimately, all that a download is basically memory, right? A memory or an aha moment or information. And this information we are then accessing, and we then interpret based on our own experience and also our own chemical awareness. So if we're in a place of fear when we're receiving certain codes and we interpret them while we're in a fearful place, those codes will take on a different meaning for us, perhaps emotionally, physically, and logically, than if we're in a place of just bliss, relaxation, and love. We're going to interpret them in a slightly different way. So everybody interprets codes or receives them based on their own receptivity, right? Are we open to receiving them? And from what I'm being shown is that there's a lot, we don't all choose to receive codes or download them or upload them from the earth in necessarily the same way. So, for example, a mathematician may have a bunch of codes in his or her field of awareness that are then expressed in numbers. The way that I receive mine, I express them in a myriad of ways, but writing is my primary medium for playing with the mathematics of the codes and the presentation of the information that they are unfolding from within in my field, so to speak. So I might read numbers in the mathematics or computer programming and it makes no sense to me. But I feel into the presentations. I will look at, for example, sacred geometry. Many of us are drawn to sacred shapes and sacred geometry because it makes us feel a certain way. We look at it and it just activates something for us. it triggers something within us, a knowing, a memory, a feeling, or stirs an emotion within our physical body, or perhaps even just within our subconscious. So that particular shape or geometry holds within it a certain spin or frequency pattern that then connects with us, our extrasensory ability, that then allows us to feel into what that uh, signifies, what that signal is for us. So many of us, if we see the golden means, for example, and we see it, we don't maybe understand it mathematically, but if we see it expressed in artwork, it brings tears to our eyes, or we just feel a certain way because it's full of encodement. It activates a charge within us, a knowingness in which we then move through a certain medium, if you will, of expression that then integrates that knowingness. And I'm kind of going into flow about this because it's different for everyone. So what I'm going to do is read some of the words and then share the multidimensional meaning of what it is that I'm actually presenting. The actual landscape of this has to do with our chemicals in our brain and our mapping system going through a rewrite or an upgrade. Excuse me, I'm just waking up, so I'm a little froggy. And the question that I've been asked is, well, is this for everyone? Is this happening for everyone? And what I was shown is that we all have access to these codes. We all are choosing in every moment, making a choice if we are open to receiving or if we are, what direction we're choosing to move our blueprint into, to expand into. Language and mathematics and communication is a living architecture, and how we choose to interact with it then expresses itself in pause for just in our reality. Excuse me. I haven't spoken much this morning, so I've got a little grackle there. So without further ado, I'm just going to read a few lines. I did start this in my previous video, but I'm going to go into more depth here. And some of the key words that came through in this were chemical brain chemistry, chemistry from the stem, the brain cells. And I'm going to relate it to what's going on collectively as well. And we're just going to play with this because one of the things that my guidance team, AKA my future versions of me, my present versions of me, all that I am tapping into, the Akashic record, right? We all have access to this living library that holds within it all this information. Have you guys ever seen the movie, what is his name? Doctor Strange? I've talked about this before. Doctor Strange is one of my favorite Marvel Comics movies. He has a scene where he's learning all of this stuff at a very fast speed. And he's got this library that's available and it's been held under lock and key. And there's a library keeper and he has to be at a certain level in order to access these certain books. But he decides to break in anyways and access these books that he figures out how to get to them. What I keep being shown is that our chemistry in our brain is aligning in such a way that we are accessing codes and accessing things within our vocabulary, we could say, that we maybe didn't have access to before, if that makes sense. And so as we access these codes of knowingness, it creates this, it increases our extrasensory ability to communicate with not only one another, but the environment around us. Many of you already experience synchronicity, and it's like a common thing for you. Some people are just now starting to activate it, and they don't know what to do with it. So maybe that'll be something else we talk about as well. So what I'm going to do is just kind of dive in, and I'm going to share. I'm not going to share screen. I'm just going to read. And if you want, you can go to carrieavon.com and read this blog post, or you don't have to. You could put on subtitles, I think. But I'm going to break it down again, to how I've gotten these messages to come through, and these plays on words. And I'm talking about spins and quandaries and diving into the innate. I'm talking about genetic pulsing. So it's just kind of a fun spin on what we're accessing. Let us go into another spin. Let us dive in to a new quandary. I'm going to read the whole thing, well, half of the whole thing, and then I'm going to come back and break it down a little bit. So if you want to fast forward, feel free. Let us go into another spin. Let us dive into a new quandary. Dive into, div in it, divinate, divine innate. We are quarrying, if you will, quarrying, digging up. There are questions that are coming up, that are surfacing based on a subset of genetic impulses that are being induced into the brain chemistry. The brain chemistry is creating a new bandwidth, if you will. It is creating a new heartbeat, resonance measured on a chart. This new creative sparks a new language from one perspective. And we invite you to play with these words again as a gentle reminder that the way you communicate is part of your gift. This isn't just me, this is everybody. The way that you allow yourself to play with certain tones and languages that are coming in are part of the many ways in which the universe weaves its spectrometry. You've gotten stuck in a mainframe, if you will, the main brain, the logical and analytical we refer to as the Anna lock it all. It puts a lock in, a locking down on the creative aspect. And this barrier that once was part of the brain encasement was set up that way as an entrapment system to trap into the folds of the brain, particular particle pieces of information that may have activated a deeper stimulation, if you will, stimulation. And as you tap into this, you recognize that the brain is reacting also to. The brain is reacting to all of the harmonics that are playing a loop, if you will. But once they have looped in and connected, I was hearing a song as I read this about, I was hearing Vanilla Ice. He took a record and he looped it. So I have to share that because it moves into how I'm interpreting this message. I'm hearing the song about Vanilla Ice looping. They leave the open tie in and dock in dodecahedron, docking head, hadron collider, hydrating the head space, creating more space in the brain. And we communicate in a very broad bandwidth so that all the words that you remember, feel, see, and connect into can bring you into any phase, if you will. I'm hearing phase lock conjunction. For example, Vanilla Ice leads me into Vanilla Sky, the movie, and I'll get to this in a little bit, and Minority Report, and the Time Loop movies he is in. It's a flavor in how much you wordplay, rap. It seems so vanilla, but in actuality is so much for these future representations that you are speaking of, and how you speak these words, and how you remember how you tune into. This is going to assist you moving forward. You forget sometimes that your looping system is attached to a certain outcome. Expectation. Plug that in real quick. And remembering this is a living light representation, so it grows as I recognize what it is I'm speaking about. And we remind you that the outcome is essentially changing, for you are consistently making choice patterns that reflect a changing and ever loving landscape of flow economy. So it's floecmy, like alchemy. So these brain patterns are picking up now on a subtle, supple frequency that before were blocked off, interlopered off. And so these receptors, I'm hearing they took a tank dive, didn't go anywhere. And I was seeing a shark tank, an electrical sensory system on a shark. So the way in which we interact with the patterns, our frequencies, bandwidths, I'm gonna pause just for a moment. I got a little distracted there for a moment. So these brain patterns are picking up now on a subtle frequency that before were blocked off, interlopered off. And so these receptors were in the dark, so to speak. I'm hearing then took a tank dive, didn't go anywhere, shark tank. And I mentioned this, I'm seeing the electrical sensory system on a shark. So the way in which we interact with the patterns or frequencies or bandwidths, bandwords is what I'm talking about. And we use many of these words interchangeably, for we recognize there's a logical variation in the patterns of these words, of those words, the way in which you communicate. You are more likely to open if you let go of the need to specify the exact quantification of the pontification that you are charting, pontification, charging, because it depletes the charge when you get stuck on a certain subset or category of the definition. It's about the journey, not the destination. Just as you try to figure out exactly what the words are that you are speaking when you are speaking multiple linguistics, we invite you to feel into what those words are and let go of the need to differentiate each word pattern in a certain way that requires you to slow down your efficiency. Sometimes these words just need to get out so they can place a certain frequency in your own spin, in your own bandwidth, in your own recognition, in your own speech patterns, ignition, tune. I'm hearing tune it, and recognition. Some of these I have to spell check here. Tune. It helps to activate the brain and syncs up the left and right hemispheres of the brain. And the speech patterns are purposefully said in such a way that it helps to sync them up. And so we seek to talk about the brain today, because the brain patterns that we are actively interacting with are new to some. And this is where some versions of telepathy begin to kick in for some. And this, I'm going to play with this a little bit. This is where the inner work is so important. The inner work is the key to access the domain. And as I'm saying this, I'm hearing the inner working. So the inner workings of the brain is the key. So the inner workings is the key to access the domain, the dominion in the brain. So it's an area of the brain that allows us to fully unlock the codes and essentially get in the know, if you will. It helps us to understand is it ours or someone else's, and helps to activate a charge so that we can decide whether to charge ahead or to let that particular thought construct to move through the system so it can be integrated or expanded upon. And I had a little out of flow here, but I'll come back to that. I was talking about whales and krill. So we tune into this architecture and let go of the need to clarify all. So as we clarify certain representations and quandaries, we allow ourselves to map into this new frequency. And this new frequency of harmonics then allows us to interlope with certain people, who are also picking up on these harmonics. It's like we're pinging off each other. We are then able to fulfill certain contractual obligations, if you wish to call them that. Seeing a map, and this is how we have for a blueprint. I'll get to this in just a bit. This has also been put on hold for many. Yet, this is also activating for many, turning on. I'm hearing to everything, turn, turn, turn. So we are subtracting from a certain number of people for whatever reason that has been delayed. But I am seeing the ones that do activate this will be stronger. So the whole harmonic is louder and a longer wave, farther away and more effective. For as you access more pictures, as you access more abilities, you shift the realities in such a way that it has such a ripple effect in the quantum exchange field that the field can't help but respond by moving. And this is part of the resolution that many contract holders have been waiting for. I talked a little bit about Dory here. One layer is that we think the astral, and I'll talk about that in different. The trauma that we have accumulated has created a disconnect in so many ways, but we are fusing together by refusing to give into the dialogue box, play on words. The dialogue that has kept us boxed in, kept us in entrapment and enslavement. And the more we tune into the inner dialogue and not the false voices that many are tuned into. And I was seeing crows, and we'll talk about that later. I was hearing, do you believe in magic? The trauma was on scales. The trauma at death created a pattern and a disconnect from their ability to close out certain agreements. But that is shifting. And I am seeing that we are doing the work for our ancestors as well, if we choose to agree in free will. And I'm hearing free willy. Oh, so much there. Some may say, why have a contract if you don't have to fulfill it? And I'm hearing we may make the decision that is no longer necessary for either person's advancement. And on the flip side, the contracts change. So we may have updated, flip-flop, floppy disk, bigger decisions. I'll skip this and talk about, I'm hearing nuggets for soul growth. This expedites the process, the sequential factor, fascia that need to line up in order to get there faster, yet expansively at the same time. This then alchemizes in the chemistry set of the brain, so to speak. That creates a new pattern that essentially disrupts the old pattern. And I'll skip some of that. I'll come back to that later. This in itself can help expedite and fulfill certain contractual obligations or feelings or experiences that one may have agreed to at a certain level. And this is an up-leveling, if you will. This creates a different feeling around time as well. I'll come back to this. This allows for certain geometries to be reconfigured and allows for certain upgrades. I'm going to go into, this is where operating from knowingness is key. Operating from higher potential of experiential freedom. Emotions are merely a form from one perspective of a charge. So when we have an intention connected with a charge, it then steers the ship. Relationships, how we relate to others. It allows us to steer the ship in a different direction and use our emotions as a charge to push us through the experience and not push us into the experience and then get stuck. Many are not differentiating their feelings versus their emotions, which are very different but equally connected. They are connected to the chemicals in the body and the brain. If I only had a brain. I'm seeing a reference here that just popped in of the scare of the scarecrow and the lion, like being brave. And if I only had a brain, yeah, they are connected to the chemicals in the body and the brain, and many have been emotionally charged. I'm hearing put them up, and they have not processed them logically, which is ironically because I just saw and felt this, and I'm going into, if you feel anger and you want to punch someone, put them up, put them up. I have to add that because it's pretty funny. So I am talking a little bit about channeling that through the brain. I'll come back to that. And therefore, so many are lost in the loops again and again and are recharging the same emotion, and it does not allow it to be redistributed through the system. And therefore, it does not allow us to ping the proper communication to the entire network. As within, so without. Body and environment pings. I'm going to do the second part of this because I haven't finished typing it up in another video. And I'm going to go back to that in just a moment. Sorry, I got a little distracted. Squirrel, but this time it was a cardinal. My husband came in, and I feed the cardinals sometimes with worms. And if I don't put food out, they come and they'll look in the window and sit on the branches and just make all kinds of noise like, hey, where's my breakfast? So I put a few worms out for them. I had just popped on here and just started reading. So I'm not going to do, I'm going to, basically it's old operating systems and patterns are being upgraded. And so everything that I shared is essentially code, right? For what's going on in our bodies. Why would I share it in this way? Because it's essentially a mapping system. It allows me to play with all aspects to further increase my ability to communicate with my environment, with source, with my guides. And it increases my ability to not only access these codes, but to understand them and run them through a logical, it's like left and right hemisphere. So I could just write this all out and just play, and that would be it. And I feel when I write this bliss and joy. And it's like, I don't get this, but I feel good when I write this. And some people feel the same way when they read it. But what it does is it helps me to communicate and understand the multidimensional way in which we communicate with all things. So I'm going to go back to the beginning. I talked a little bit about this, so I'm not going to go into it too much, but I put in the beginning, let us go into another spin. So we are all spinning. Our toroidal field is spinning. The earth is spinning. Everything is moving. So this is a spin like a yarn. You know, it's like, let me tell a yarn. Let me tell a tale. And whenever I say, let us go into another spin, I know we're going into a different subject. Like we're ready to flow. Let us dive in to a new quandary. This is going within. And let's dip in. So if I go into what the word quandary means, quandary, and I'm on ETYM online, and I just look up quandary, state of great difficulty or perplexity. But what I love about this is it also says the word is of an unknown origin, and even the pronunciation is unsettled in old dictionaries. I talked about this in my previous video about how the English language is truly limiting in certain ways. And we think that this, as scholars perhaps, that the way that words are is so important to categorize and break them down, and this goes with this. And my way of doing things is like blow it all apart and then put it back together, because that's how things work, right? So it doesn't have to be even taken apart to be reconfigured. So quandary is a word that we use. We think it means a great difficulty or perplexity, but we don't even know where it came from. So this is a really great way to start this out, to remind me, guess what? Language is language. Doesn't matter where it's from, we're using it, right? We're utilizing it. And it may have based on the Latin word quando. And what does quando mean? It means when, at what time, at the time that, like, what time was it? When did this happen? But it also might be related to QUI, which is who. So who, when, what, why, where, how. So as I say that, I always go back to the caterpillar. Who am I? Blowing the smoke rings, because essentially language is based on a toroidal spin. And if you take the toroidal field and you put a letter on it, it creates a shadow. And I didn't know this until I looked up Dan Winter's work. Dan Winter, fractalfield.com. He talks about Sanskrit and the Hebrew language. But I was seeing it and I was understanding it, and he was able to put it in a beautiful, logical, this is what it looks like. And this is the power of casting a spell. So if we go back to, I encourage you guys and invite you guys to check out his link. I'll try to share it here, but I talk about him quite frequently. So quandary, let us dive into a new quandary. Dive into, divinate, divine, innate. I'm actually going to share screen briefly, just to kind of, I'll just read this and then share screen. So divinate the innate, divine innate. We are quarrying, if you will. We are digging up. There are questions that are coming up that are surfacing based on a subset of genetic impulses that are being introduced into the brain chemistry. The brain chemistry is creating a new bandwidth, if you will. It is creating a new heartbeat. So many of us have heard about the brain-heart connection, that there's a heartbeat. Now, I looked up this yesterday just a little bit, and apparently the genetic impulses are, it's a play on words. So I'll kind of go back. Let's talk about quarrying, if you will. We're quarrying. So you guys know what a rock quarry is, and you dig up the rocks and you find out what's underneath them. But I did not know there was a difference between quarrying and mining, right? So mining is the process of extracting buried material below the Earth's surface. Quarrying refers extracting materials directly from the surface. And I've made this differentiation several times. And granted, I'm not going to really sit and categorize that, but I'm seeing why. It's like, this is on the surface now. It's right below the surface. It isn't, we're diving in, but it's here. It's in our skin. It's in our chemicals. It's right in front of us. But we're digging it up and we're exposing it. We're expressing it. There are questions that are right there that we're kind of tapping into and activating. And the other thing I wanted to mention is, if you ever look at a quarry, you can see the layers of the strata. And what I was guided as I was expressing this is, we're starting to see, because the word quandary was when did this happen? And we're starting to see more of our true history of who we are. We're starting to remember, right, that there are these other layers and they're right below the surface. And that tells us our true value, our true worth, our true age of mankind, our DNA. So there are questions that are coming up that are surfacing based on a subset. So I'm going to share screen. Now we're in share screen. So if I look at these questions are surfacing based on a subset, and if I go into subset here, I'm on Wikipedia. Hopefully that's big enough. I tried to make it nice and large. Of course, my eyes are directly drawn to A and B, right? A bubble within a bubble. So a subset, in mathematics, a subset A of a set B, a set A is a subset of set B if all elements of A are also elements of B. It is possible for A and B to be equal. And I always think about how we hold everything within us. A bubble within a bubble within a bubble, right? Yet each human exists within a bubble, yet we're the same. Talks about an inclusion. A as a subset, it's containment, right? So if I go back to this, surfacing based on a subset of genetic impulses that are being introduced into the brain chemistry. So it's this containment, this bubble within a bubble that we're starting to see right below the surface. And it can be expressed as A or A contained within B. This is the brain. These are the chemicals. This is the body. This is the container of the body, but this is also our environment. It is our reality. It defines a partial order on sets. And I liked to look this up because it's a binary relation indicating that, oh, I'm not going to go into that, but you could play with this if you wanted to, because I could go on and on for an hour just on that. So this is being introduced. What are genetic impulses? So I had looked up genetic impulses, and what comes up is that it's what we think is our genes. Oh, I'm impulsive because my father was impulsive, so on and so forth. But this is a play on words, because actually, that's the wrong one. I was guided to look up genetic pulses. And I'm going to make this one a little bit bigger. And I'm on a government article, which I will share the link to this. And it says a fundamental problem in biology is to understand how genetic circuits implement core cellular functions. Now, remember, so far the questions have been quandary: when, where, what, right? We've talked about the brain changing. And this is also saying that a subset of genetic impulses, so a bubble within a bubble, are being introduced into the brain chemistry. So, unexpectedly, we are discovering that key transcriptions and regulatory factors pulse on and off repeatedly, even when cells are maintained in constant conditions. This type of spontaneous dynamic behavior is pervasive, appearing in diverse cell types. So we'll skip all that. So it shows how pulsing is generated and controlled by underlying regulatory circuits. And it provides critical capabilities to cells in stress response, signaling, and development. A major theme is the ability of pulsing to enable time-based regulation analogous to strategies used in engineered systems. It talks about a layer of temporal organization in the cell. So I see this all as a play on words. And it talks about the concentrations and activities of key cellular regulatory molecules, such as the transcription factors that control gene expression, generally remain steady over time or fluctuate stochastically around fixed mean values. So its processes, intrinsic dynamics are essential for their functions, such as cell cycle, circadian clock, or neural action potentials are considered the exception rather than the rule. So I'm basically seeing this is all changing, and our pulses, we're kind of understanding that it's regulating this. It's saying that they've emerged from quantitative, time-lapsed microscopy and fluorescent reporter genes that allow them to track this behavior. Now, I was talking about pinging off of each other and pulsing off of each other. So this subset, the bubble within the bubble that holds both, all of the information, is being these genetic impulses, these pings, these are that regulate our genetics, are being introduced into the brain chemistry. The brain chemistry is creating a new bandwidth, if you will. Now, we hear a lot about bandwidths in the spiritual community, right? Vibration, frequency, bandwidths. And I understand they're all different, but I want to talk a little bit about bandwidth. So the brain's creating a new bandwidth, a new heartbeat. So I was shown literally a brand new band. It is a maximum rate, and I like to talk about computing. because it's very easy to logically interpret what's going on with the body by comparing it to the computer linguistics. In computing, bandwidth is the maximum rate of data transfer across a given path. So there's lots of bandwidths, but I like it talks about signals measured in hertz. What do we talk about when we talk about the frequency of the heart, right? 528 and 432, the hertz. We talk about the hertz of the Schumann resonance, right? So it's a vibration, it's a frequency. The frequency range between the lowest and highest attainable frequency while meeting a well-defined impairment level in signal power. The actual bit rate that can be achieved depends not only on the signal bandwidth, but also on the noise on the channel. And it talks about peak bit rate or the information rate or the useful bit rate, the channel capacity, right? The maximum throughput of a logical communication path. So basically we're looking at, and I could go into so much here, right? This is expanding. We're creating even more. It's like it hasn't been measured on a chart, but it can be now. It's a signal also. It's an output that we're signaling. And I'll get to this later in what I wrote about on how we communicate, not only with our bodies, but with each other. We've talked about this a lot in the starseed community, but as humans, we're increasing our input output and our carrier waves and our signals. And so our extrasensory abilities are really kicking it in. This new creative speaking sparks a new language. I was literally seeing the brain sparking, arcing, and it's a communication, right? So DNA holds languages and patterns, right? From one perspective. We invite you to play with these words again. Communication is part of our gift. It allows us to play with the tones and energies that are coming in that are part of the many ways in which the universe weaves its spectrometry. So if I go in and show you this, so I'm back at recording spectrometry. I love this. So here we go, right? The measurement of the interactions between light and matter and the reactions and measurements of radiation intensity and wavelength. Now I skipped a lot of what I wrote, which you'll see if you read my blog post when I was reading it out loud to you guys because it really wasn't in flow. But what I was seeing was literally, I was hearing radioactive. And I've written over the years about we are the new, what is it called when you have nuclear reactors, right? We are new, and it's clear that we are the new human, and it's our radioactivity, literally our radioactivity. If you look back at what I wrote, basically we're talking about the noise, or excuse me, in, is it genetic pulse? Well, that's a pulse generator. So I'll have to come back to that maybe later. So this, I'll just touch on this. It's an electrocorporator. This is DNA delivery, gene pulse products. So I'm going to skip that actually. But essentially this radioactive, it's increasing the noise, right? So this talks about this is dependent, how much we are capable and how much we can hold and how much channel capacity as channels of light, right? Depends on the bandwidth in the hertz and the noise on the channel. So radio active, this is increasing. Heat is actually stirring this up and creating this spark and creating this language that essentially is our letters that are within our DNA, and also the numbers that are mathematical for the hertz that we are vibrating at. And I always think of the heartbeat, the hertz, right? Because that changes our vibration when we're in our heart. So when I go into spectrometry, the funny part about this is, so what does this remind you of? Dark Side of the Moon, right? Pink Floyd. That's the first thing that comes into my mind. But essentially, if I look at this is the way the universe weaves this. Okay, the universe weaves it like this. We are the rainbow, and we are essentially the pyramid. So the funny part about this is the day that I typed this up, my husband comes home. He's my oracle. And I have more to add to that. He comes home and he was all excited. I talked about this in my previous video because he'd purchased vinyl, 2 records. And the vinyl records were Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, which we already had, but it was very crackly. And the other one was Rush. Is it 2120? Which I always like to play with those numbers. Here we are in 2021. They wrote about 2120. I think it's 2120 or 2121. Anyways, I'm seeing this play on our numbers and synchronicity. And when you pull out the Pink Floyd album, lo and behold, it has an old school poster of the pyramids in Egypt, the 3 pyramids. Later on in this writing, and as I'm typing this up, my husband's so excited and he shows it to me. In addition to that, he just happens to play one song on the record while he's setting it all up, which is, I think it's Run Like Hell, but it's time, right? It's the clocks. Ticking away, the moments that make up a dull day, fritter and waste. So as I'm typing this up, I look back and I'm writing about, not subset, quandary, right, quarrying, quandary, when, what time? So it's a whole synchronistic way that the universe, through my husband at this point, through Pink Floyd, the past, is communicating now on this record, which of course leads me into the Hall of Records and the Akashic Records, which I'm going to do in a completely different video, but it's all connected. It's all coming online for us. So as I share this one more time, the spectrometry, this changing, it's how the universe communicates. This is changing by the interactions between light and matter, right? We are in form from one perspective, and the reactions and measurements of radioactive intensity and wavelength. So it's measuring a specific spectrum. Okay. Now, the other thing that I wanted to share was, why did I want to go into here? I'll come back to that in just a moment. Play on words whenever I write pow, pow. And I've basically was saying, my guides were saying, you've gotten stuck in the mainframe, if you will, the main brain. The logical and analytical, we refer to as the analog it all. So it puts a lock, I'm just going to say lock in because certain words are being tagged right now, on the creative aspect. So when we're in that left brain, that's the old school. Logical, analytical, categorize. Why? But now it's like, well, when did this start happening? Oh, I'm feeling into this a little bit. And this barrier was once part of the brain encasement, was set up that way. So I was shown literally the left and right hemispheres of the brain there was a lock put on it so that we'd have to separate feminine, masculine, logical, analytical, right, left, right? So this is changing. And literally I've been shown that the spinal fluid, the cerebral spinal fluid, is the Kundalini Express, the Kundalini Highway. We are being expressed now on this higher spectrum, right? So we're able, as I say this, I'm being guided to go back to the spectrometry, another color. So these are the colors we had before. There's another one. There's another totally separate but combined color that's coming through. So this was an entrapment system, and we were being trapped into the folds of the brain. So what I was shown is it was compressed, and I'm going to go back to subset this. So this, pretend this is the folds that the brain holds. It's still there. It's just a bubble within a bubble. And this was then kept. But now as this opens and creates space, This expands and we have ability to access both from one perspective. As an entrapment system to trap into the folds of the brain, particular particle pieces of information. So it's certain things were kept in there. And it's, again, I'm going back to what I said earlier about the codes and the downloads that we're receiving. They're not really coming from outside of us. They've always been within. But we have help that's coming up from the earth, from these higher frequencies, that we're now able to then turn those components on from one perspective. Particles that are accelerating. So these particles, particle pieces, are accelerating and moving at a faster speed that then opens and vibrates at a higher vibratory rate that may have activated a deeper stimulation, if you will, stimulation. So this is all a play on words, obviously. Basically, this was entrapped to keep us in a deeper simulation, to keep us asleep, and less stimulation. It had to be a deeper going within in order to stimulate at a deeper level. But now it's more available and accessible at the surface, the quarry. As you tap into this, and as I say tap into, I think of a tap on like a faucet and a tree. When you get maple syrup, for example. Here we go. I was hearing radioactive, a nuclear reactor. I'm sure I could go into a whole flow on this, but I haven't. The brain is reacting to all of the harmonics that are playing a loop, if you will. And as I say loop, I am seeing a crochet loop. So I'm just going to pause this for a moment. Oops, I accidentally went back to the beginning. I looped. So if I go back to this loop, we've been stuck in a loop. We've been stuck in the simulation, right? But these harmonics were being played on a loop. But if you look at a loop, when you loop over a record, for example, Vanilla Ice, which is what I get to next, Vanilla Ice took a record and he looped it, but then he created his own song based on the components of old harmonics. And then he added his own, if you want to call it harmony or rap, or words or communication on top of the old loop. And essentially, our reality has been based on those types of looping patterns. But they were a closed loop system. So I'll just kind of show really quick. If you look at loops, it's a sequence of statements which is specified once but can be carried out several times in succession. The code inside the loop, or the body of the loop, is obeyed a specific number of times until some condition is met, or indefinitely. And I really like this because if you look at this, this says an infinite loop, and I was shown that we are these infinite beings, of course, is a sequence of instructions that is written, will continue endlessly unless an external intervention occurs. And this says a loop until some condition is met. So this is what's going on. We have met those conditions. We have moved through the conditioning and the entrapment that we've been encased within, and we've broken through, we've birthed this new reality, right? And now we're going back and we're opening those loops. So now it's no longer a closed loop system, it's an open system that we are looping into. And what I was shown is that we're literally connecting into it, creating a connection, but it doesn't mean we're stuck in that loop. And I kind of talked about crochet loops. So they loop in, these energies loop in and hook into to introduce and induce a particular wave. So all we're doing is we're connecting in and we're looping in and we're creating this, and it creates a wave pattern, if you will. But once they've been looped into, the energy, the chords, the connections, the frequencies, they leave an open, we're still tied to it, we're docked in, but we're not stuck. Now we can operate from a higher bandwidth and a higher frequency. And here I wrote dodecahedron, do docking head. we're going to take action. We're going to dock into the information is being plugged in through the brain. And then I was hearing dodecahedron, hadron collider, kaleidoscope, gyroscope, hydrating the headspace. And I'm probably going to maybe just go a little bit longer and then end on this, because this takes me into a whole new spin. Hydrating the headspace means we're adding fluidity to it. And we talk about this in cranial sacral about when you hydrate fascia. I guess that's not really a cranial sacral thing, but we hydrate the fascia so that the body can communicate. So I'm just going to pause for a moment. I talked about the fascia, I think, in my previous video. And this was all very, very symbolic, just these couple of lines. And it's funny because I almost didn't write down the whole vanilla ice thing. So I was like, oh, this is so silly. But then later on, I pull it in and I'm like, oh, that was so important. So some of the things we blow off as unimportant really tie things together and help us to dock into this bigger expression. So basically, once we've looped in, it's introducing and inducing, it's bringing out, right? Or it's introducing a new wave pattern. And then it opens up this space. Now, dodecahedron is 12, right? Ironically, if you look up, am I sharing screen? I don't think I am. If you look up a dodecahedron, and I'm going to go here, it looks like this from one particular, but it's a 12-sided, okay? And I always think of 12 dimensions. I think of 12 chakra systems. It's like a higher up. You know, we think of chakras, we have 7 chakras. No, we have a lot of chakras or energy centers or nodes of access points and spin. Essentially, a dodecahedron, an Izimi polyhedron with 12 flat faces. And it talks about platonic solids. Now, I'm not going to go into the whole platonic solids while we're in this, because from what I've been shown, we have more that we are now learning about that are building blocks of reality. And I always go back to you don't know what you don't know. But of course, I go back into all of these dodecahedrons. These are all different forms. And of course, I think about the the pyramids. And you can play with that a little bit if you want, but they tie in, it creates this dodecahedron. I look at the earth. Now I know that there's more to it. It's not just a dodecahedron, but something has activated within this 12 shape, this 12 frequency, and it's these higher fields or nesting dolls, right, around us. Now, if I go into docking in the head, right, or linking up, docking is like a puzzle piece connecting, and the hadron collider I'm going to get into in just a moment, but we're hydrating the headspace. So when you have an aqueduct, lets the in and it lets the water out. Okay, this leads me back to timing of the when and the was it subset? It wasn't subset. I think I moved out of this, but that's okay. The moving in and the moving out of the rhythms of the DNA. So think of the DNA as puzzle pieces, and it's going from a double to a triple, and we're increasing our DNA alphabet. So that's another spin totally, but it's all connected. So hydrating the fascia is part of this. And so if you look at fascia, if you've never seen it, I highly encourage you to look it up. And I just want to go through what I kept getting was deep fascia. It's a layer of dense connective tissue. Okay, this is not what I want. I want to talk about what it does. It's basically connected to everything. It's connected into everything. And I always see this as our reality. Okay, and it talks about the fact that it has compartments. Okay, it can be divided, but it's a high density of elastin fiber that determines its extensibility or resilience. And that was key. Deep fascia is richly supplied with sensory receptors. My second video will be more about this because I had all of this flow about sharks. But essentially, sensory receptors are neurons in the nervous system that convert a specific type of stimulus via their receptors into action potentials. The cell bodies, we'll go into this at another time, but I'm just showing this because this is how interconnected everything is. As above, so below, as within, so without. I think what I'm going to do is just kind of like make sure I save this link and go in there. So it's creating more space in the brain. It's opening and expanding it up. It's creating a more fluidity in it, and it's less condensed. It's opening up all that was in there that was stuck, and it's allowing it to move and intermingle and connect in an open looping system rather than docked in and locked in. Now, the Hadron Collider, I think of this as connected to many different things, but without getting into some idea that it's a control system, I just kind of want to be open about this. Essentially, if I pull that up, and I'm just going to go into that right now because the first thing that comes up when I show you this space, CERN, obviously, when I open this up, look what the symbol is. It's exactly what we looked at with the subset. So it's a bubble within a bubble, A and B. So to me, I was like, okay, this is part of and it's a particle accelerator. It's a superconducting particle accelerator. Now, this could take me into a whole other video, right? For those of you who are aware of what that means and what it does. From my perspective, we're increasing this radioactivity. Our particles are accelerating, they're opening up, and essentially, why was that device created? Without getting into the, let's say, multidimensional reason that it was created, we could say the science was so that we could figure out particle acceleration and go back to the Big Bang Theory. All right, realistically, what it means for me, realistically, in my reality, is that we're accessing our multidimensionality. We are accessing other dimensions and timelessness, or creating our own, again, the caterpillar in Alice in Wonderland. We're creating our own wormholes, but not in the way that is detrimental, the way that is expansive. I'm going to do this last paragraph, and then I'm going to end on this note. And we communicate in a very broad bandwidth. So remember, we have our bandwidths here, right? A network of peak bit information, bits, right? Bandwidths. So that the words you remember, see, feel, and connect into, again, language is a feeling, can bring you into any phase, if you will. So any phase lock conjunction. So my multidimensional self knows what phase lock conjunction is. My Carrie in the now moment knows what it is in the now, in the know, but I really don't know what that was. So of course I look it up, and it leads me to a phase locked loop, which I didn't know that was a thing. It's a control system that generates an output signal whose phase is related to the phase of an input signal. So what we're putting out is related to what we're putting in, or what's coming from inner to outer, right? It talks about a variable frequency oscillator, which led me back to what I spoke about with the DNA earlier, and how our DNA communicates at different circuitry times, right? It's not consistent, even if we're consistent. It's got a different heartbeat, a different circuitry rhythm. And this talks about it can be tuned over some range. It works by a super heterodyne principle, which I'll have to look that up. I'm not really sure what that is. Maybe that'll be another flow. But essentially, what I see as what is phase. In physics and mathematics, the phase, periodic function f of some real variable is an angle-like quality representing the fraction of the cycle covered up to t. Okay, all of that is Greek, Latin, Greek to me, but it's expressed in such a scale that it varies by one full turn. So I'll have to play with that a little bit. I see a phase as a cycle. So if I go back and I look at, I'm hearing phase lock conjunction, it's bringing us into any phase, if you will, any phase. So it's bringing us into multidimensionality through this. And that phase lock cycle is what are we putting in is what we're putting out. So it's action, right? It's action at a distance from one perspective. And I could go into so much here because there's all kinds of, I love the whole integrated circuit because it talks about a superconductor, which we just looked at, a superconductor of the CERN device, right? The Hadron Collider. I don't even know if I'm saying that right. But I see that as it's talking about silicon. So we're going from silicate or from carbon to crystalline, right? That's we've talked a lot about that in the spiritual and the I keep hearing the evolving community, and essentially it's the results in circuits that are orders of magnitude smaller, faster, basically better, right? So I could go into this a little deeper. I think I did in the last when I looked this up, but anyways, we are extracting the original information bearing signal from a carrier wave. It is used to recover the information content from the modulated carrier wave. So that's us. We are recovering the original. We're going back to our DNA and our ancestors and out of time, right? We're not stuck anymore. We can go anywhere with this if we choose to. This led me into Vanilla Sky, the movie. So I said Vanilla Ice earlier, the looping, and then I was hearing Vanilla Sky. Well, I didn't really know what Vanilla Sky, the movie, was. And apparently, I'm just going to read this briefly. Oops, this is not what I want, but that's okay. Basically, it talks about him going into an alternate ending. So he basically changes the outcome. He decides to die and goes into an alternate ending in the movie, which I've never seen the movie. So he makes the choice. Oops, did I stop share? I'm still recording. Okay. So he makes the choice to die. He is put into like cryogenic. He's like frozen, right? And then he chooses, they bring him back to life and he has another life, an alternate ending. And essentially, we are going through, we are making these choices to change how we operate. Our blueprint is living, breathing, moving with us. So we have a base, but we're advancing, we're expanding, our bandwidths are at, but it changes. We thought we might be stuck. For example, I'm even going to bring it back to this idea that we've been shut down and we've been controlled and manipulated. Okay, that is true from this time, but now that doesn't matter anymore from another perspective, from a multidimensional perspective. And we are now remapping that, and we're like, no, we're choosing to be the record holders and the record keepers and to open and expand our DNA because it's our right to do that. So what happens then, we're getting help because we're outputting, we're asking for it, we're opening to receive it, and the universe is like, here you go, sun coming in, earth coming up, our ancestors being able to connect with us through the whale lines, the singing lines, the song lines of our ancestors that's in our coded, light coded DNA beyond the skin suit, but the skin suit and the brain technology is part of it. Okay, so I'm going to finish here and then I'll do part 2 if you're interested another time. So basically, and I'll maybe break this down a little bit more because I think phase lock conjunction means a lot. And I was thinking of all these movies that Tom Cruise has been in, So alternate endings, minority report, he can see the future and basically is, goes, it's kind of like time traveling, right? Um, and and that's another kind of interesting movie. And then the other one where he's in a time loop. And basically he has to do this one thing and it gets him out of the closed circuit time loop. And then all of a sudden, time is different. It's not stuck anymore. So it's all symbolic for me. It's a flavor in how you wordplay, rap. It seems so vanilla, but in actuality is so much. For these futuristic representations you are speaking of, and how you speak these words, and as you remember, so I'm remembering this is real. And how you tune into it is going to assist you in moving forward. This isn't just about me. This is how we're tuning into these changes and what's going on. Our input to output and how we respond to it is literally going to assist us moving forward, to move forward, and how we move forward. You forget sometimes that your looping system is attached to a certain outcome expectation. And we remind you that the outcome is consistently changing. Vanilla Sky. He thought he had this option and he made another option and it changed his, it was an alternate ending. So we might think that the ending is going one way, but it's going to completely change based on our own output, because we are consistently making choice patterns that reflect a changing, ever-loving, ever-loving, ever-loving landscape of flow alchemy. So flow alchemy is this mix of flow and alchemy, flow alchemy. So we're alchemizing through this heat, through this radioactivity, tuning out these noises and tuning into a deeper resonance within ourselves that we are literally stimulating from within, but also with the help of the earth and the sun and the planets and our guides. And we're stimulating this, and when we're in the heart and we channel it through this, ever loving. I was hearing Moby, the song Moby, ever loving. Now, when I go into Moby, ever loving, which I got to write down because guess what that takes me to? The song Ever Loving, great song, by the way. If you've never listened to it, oops, I spelled that wrong. I'm just going to pause for a moment and you'll see why that came into my awareness. So I'm still here, and I said it's taking us into an ever-changing, ever-loving, ever-loving, ever-loving. So when I repeat something like that, it's like, pay attention, landscape of flow alchemy. So I was hearing Moby, ever-loving. Well, Moby takes me into a Mobius strip. So Mobius strip, hello, infinity, a toroidal donut, a spin. It's a loop. And it talks about when embedded in three-dimensional Euclidean space, only one boundary curve. Now I'm going to do the separate video on this because this takes me into a completely different flow. It's talking about a ruled surface. So I'm going to come back to this because quite frankly, I just want to share from a shorter perspective. When we're in this space of loving, it creates this infinite connection to all things. And it's, again, flip it and reverse it, flip it and reverse it, change it, all angles. And I'll come back to this in a deeper video, but we're making these choice patterns that reflect this now because we're in this looping system. So we kind of attach what we think is going to be the outcome to an expectation that we've had based on our previous loops that we've been stuck in. So because we've been, let's say we've been financially, distraught when we were younger, or our parents were. So now we don't know how to receive abundance because we never had the habit, because we were stuck in a loop in our memory. All of a sudden something opens within us and we have all these ideas, or we just open to the abundance of the universe, and that changes for us. So that's one example of what this is talking about, of an infinite. And I want to go back one more time to this phase lock communication, or phase lock conjunction, because it's talking about recovering a signal from a noisy communication channel. Remember, we talked earlier about the noise, and it generates a stable frequencies at the multiples of an input frequency, and it distributes precisely timed clock pulses. So remember, we were talking earlier about the DNA has circuitry pulses that are not even clearly understood. And this is all working together. So the pulses in the brain, the DNA, everything's got a heartbeat. And I could go into so many different layers there. Okay, and this is it. I'm going to end here. So these brain patterns are picking up now on subtle, supple frequencies. So they're not necessarily going to be in our face. They might be soft, that before were blocked off. They were canceled out by the noise. Too much volume, too many hostile frequencies that were purposely injected into our reality and looped us, kept us in this loop. I wrote interlopered off. So we kind of know what an interloper is, but that's a play on words with a looper. So this also has to do with time travel technologies. That's not relevant for this. Well, everything's connected. So these receptive tanks, receptors, were in the dark, so to speak. I was hearing took a tank dive, didn't go anywhere, Shark Tank, and I was seeing the electrical sensory system on a shark. So I'm going to end on this because it's a long one. And the reason is because I really want to talk about the extrasensory beyond just these brain waves and the DNA, because I wrote down the Shark Tank. And then last night, my husband picks a show because it's Shark Week, which I didn't realize. I wrote this maybe 2 weeks ago, about a week ago, 2 weeks ago. And he picks a show. And the night before last, I dreamed that I didn't remember the dream, but I woke up and all I was saying was the universe hates a vacuum. I don't know if it was the universe abhors. The universe abhors a vacuum. I was saying it, like kept saying it. I woke up, went back to sleep, woke up saying it again. I'm like, okay, this is funny. I don't know what that means. Well, I forgot to look it up. So then last night, my husband picks a show about sharks, killer whales, which is what I wrote in here. And in the show, this woman says, the universe abhors a vacuum. And I just had a moment of complete like, whoa, I'm in it. Of course, my husband's like, he does the nice pat on the head. Okay, honey. Or makes a joke about it. But needless to say, I had this huge flow that spun, put me into a new spin of what this all means for our own bodies. And I've been writing about sharks and being invited to learn more about their extrasensory abilities because we have the capability of harnessing, and we are a very similar evolutionary advancement is happening within the own human body and our chemistry sets. So I will go into that in the next video. And just kind of end on this note. Basically, I'll say that the way we interact with these patterns, these words, and these bandwidths are changing. So basically, I'm just kind of going into, I'll start off on the next video, kind of where I ended here. And the other thing to just kind of recognize is that I guess I didn't talk about that yet. Not everybody's going to feel this. So that's what I'll talk about in the next video. Not everybody's necessarily going to know what's going on. Not everybody's going to be aware of this. Some people have chosen to slow down, but others have chosen to speed up. And I'll talk about why and what that means for us based on my own perspective and what I'm writing about. The shark. There'll be more that comes in. I'm hearing when that shark bites. Da, 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 da. So I had all this information coming in about Mack trucks and shark bites, and yeah, it's fun stuff. So thank you so much. If you've made it this far, awesome. That's great. Kudos to you. Thank you so much for playing and sharing this now moment with myself and with one another. And have fun creating and being open to our extra receptors that are turning on. And the way we interact with our environment is shifting quickly. So the more open we can be and the less in resistance we can be, the more the codes that we already have within our brain and our field can be accessed and integrated in a nutshell. So until the next video, I'll go into all the other juicy stuff in video 2. Namaste.